Praise be to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Let us pray together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts, gathered physically here today and virtually as well, be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. If ever there was a time when you felt your lives measured by the expectations and demands of the Scriptures, I would think that this morning would be that time for you. Listen again to the weighty demands that the Apostle Paul places on those who would be followers of Jesus. He writes in our first reading, "Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought to what is noble in the sight of all. And if it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves." Paul certainly expects the Christians in Rome, and you and I as well, to do some heavy lifting in our efforts to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ. A couple of weeks ago, I received a gift in the mail from the Southeastern Synod. And whenever I receive a gift in the mail from the Southeastern Synod, I always go, uh-oh, before I open the envelope. But in this case, it was truly a gift. It was a tiny volume entitled 30 Days with Martin Luther King Jr., along with a letter from our bishop, Bishop Strickland, reiterating that he is in prayer for all the congregations in the Southeastern Synod at this time as we try to carry on our life together in the midst of a pandemic. And also offering his thanks and appreciation for the dedicated service of the leaders of our congregation and the pastors who have done the best that we could creatively during these months to hold our congregations together and to bring us together in worship and to continue our mission and our ministry. Of course, the book that came along with the envelope was a gift to all the pastors of the Southeastern Synod. And just about every night in my home, we have been reading one of these brief devotions as we sit down for dinner together. And the book begins heavy with demand and expectation. Martin Luther King began with the excerpts in this devotion talking about the commandment to love our enemies. And of course, we all know that Jesus gave us that command. He said we are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Okay. But that commandment, to me, seems so far outside the boundaries of what is humanly possible that I have often wondered how many of us really make a concerted effort to love our enemies. But it became clear to me early on reading these excerpts from Dr. King's writings that he did indeed endeavor during his lifetime to love his enemies. And of course, as we know, he had a great many enemies, including the one who eventually assassinated him. And yet his commitment to try to reach that level, to be willing to love his enemies and bear the burden of that effort, not only for himself, but for the sake of the movement he led, seems so Herculean to me that I find it overwhelming. And of course, if all of that were not enough, what Paul has told us, what Martin Luther King says in many of his writings, we turn to today's gospel reading and we hear Jesus tell us as his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. I don't know about you, but I can't read these passages without feeling a heavy weight of the burden of discipleship. I continue to marvel at the way that the readings from our lectionary speak to us during this time in a very relevant way, week after week during this pandemic. And certainly that is true for me in the case of today's readings. I feel during these past, well, now it's been almost 7 months, believe it or not, of this pandemic, that I have been carrying a heavy weight. And indeed, we all have. All of us have faced different kinds of challenges trying to navigate our way through a time that is truly unprecedented for all of us, trying to find our way, and in the midst of the new normal that we are dealing with, trying to maintain the establishment of our lives, our family lives, our love, those activities, those events that give meaning and purpose to our lives. And of course for me, it has been the burden of trying to more or less reinvent the way I have always pastored a congregation, and bearing the weight of trying to hold the congregation together. Perhaps I have tried to carry that weight by myself too much. But indeed, I have felt that load, trying to provide meaningful opportunities for worship and trying to keep us connected with one another so that we feel that we are still a part of a community during this time when we can't go and play pool together, when I can't visit you in your homes or visit your hospital rooms. It has been very challenging and indeed. And of course, we've all carried the weight of burdens and discipleship during this difficult time. For some of us, the weight has been the loneliness and isolation that we may have been feeling. And then, of course, there are those of us who have dealt with the medical threat that COVID-19 presents up close and personal, because loved ones of ours have become ill with this virus, and some of us have lost our loved ones to this virus. And then, of course, we have teachers, we have students who are facing the weight and the burden, the struggle of trying to learn electronically these days in order to maintain their safety. And so during these last 6-7 months, you may have found yourself saying about this time, or at least thinking, in order to put the best most practical spin on things for yourself, well, I guess this is just my cross to bear for now. We hear people say that all the time when they're facing a challenging time in their lives. This is just my cross to bear. And if you have found yourself saying that or thinking it over these last many months, I do want to make an important point of clarification this morning. When Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "If anyone wants to follow me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me," he wasn't referring to difficult situations or challenges we face, crises that are thrust upon us from the outside due to circumstances beyond our control. That's not what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about the very real choice we sometimes have to make as disciples, to pick up the cross for the sake of being faithful to Jesus and to one another. It's the very decision that Jesus had to make on behalf of us. He made the choice to carry the cross to Calvary and to die on that cross for all of us. In today's gospel reading, there is an interesting change in the preceding verses and in the verses that we heard this morning. You remember from last week, Peter, who often puts his foot in his mouth whenever he speaks, gets the answer right. He proclaims that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And as a result, Jesus praises him for his insight and calls him Peter, the rock. And on this rock I will build my church. And then in the space of just a few short verses, in today's gospel reading, he calls Peter Satan. What the heck happened? Well, you must know that wherever Peter appears in the Gospels, he always represents us, the disciples, the church. And so Jesus, in fact, is calling the church Satan in today's reading. And what does he mean by that? Well, he hears in Peter's voice trying to persuade him away from the course that involves taking up his cross and suffering and dying. He hears in Peter's voice the voice of the tempter, leading him away from the path that God has set before him. And indeed, that is the voice of temptation that we often provide as a church. We go out of our ways very often to convince ourselves that it is not necessary to carry the cross. Maybe it was at one time, but not in this day and age, not in our nation. We don't have to carry the cross. Being a follower of Jesus should not exact so high a price from us. And yet it was a price that Jesus was willing to pay for us, and our attempt to protect Jesus is really an attempt to protect ourselves from having to sacrifice, to endure any kind of suffering, from having to pick up the cross to follow Jesus. We are the ones who try to tempt Jesus away from the mission that his Father sent him to fulfill, and in so doing, we want to make life easier on ourselves. But Jesus is clear about this in today's gospel reading. He pulls no punches. He tells those who would be his followers, you must deny yourself and take up the cross in order to follow me. Last week I was on a Zoom call with the bishop, Bishop Strickland, and a number of pastors from around the Southeastern Synod, from the 4 states that make up our Synod. told us a story over Zoom about a conversation he'd had with one of our colleagues, with another pastor somewhere in the southeastern Senate. They were talking about the demands and the struggles of pastoring a congregation during this pandemic period. And the pastor at one point said to the bishop, "I didn't sign up for this." I have had that thought many times in these last 6 or 7 months. And I know the bishop empathized with what the pastor was saying to him. But in response to him, the bishop said, "Yes, you did." And he said that to all of us on Zoom too. We did sign up for this. When we signed up for Jesus, we signed up for this. We signed up to take up our cross and follow him, to bear the burden. The bishop reminded us of that, but he did add, but you don't have to carry the cross alone. This is something that I need to be reminded of frequently, because very often I have the feeling, and have over the last 30 years of my ministry, that it was mostly up to me to do the heavy lifting. But that is not true. We have each other to support us and uphold us, and we have Jesus. The one who bore the cross for us will always be there to bear the cross with us. Whoops, that was a mistake. I guess I needed lessons.